Okay, so thank you everyone for joining me this evening for my very first combat anxiety workshop, which I have decided to do as a free event to help people that might be struggling with anxiety, that might know people with anxiety and how best to help them. So it's going to be quite interactive, although you don't need to communicate with me during the session. You will be able to take away some really good coping strategies in order to help you to cope with stress, anxiety. So by the end of this session, you'll have a good idea of what anxiety is, how it manifests itself in terms of physically, mentally and emotionally, what is anxiety and how it affects us, but also some really good coping strategies in how to deal with it. So this is me. I'm Louise Squires. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I am based in Bromsgrove in Worcestershire, and I pretty much live and breathe clinical hypnotherapy. I see clients here on a daily basis. I've worked with probably around 300 clients to help them with all sorts of issues. So hypnotherapy is really effective for lots of issues. 90% of what I see is anxiety, depression. I work with phobias. I work with addictions. I help people to stop smoking. I help people with weight loss. So I work with lots and lots of different issues. I am really passionate about anxiety, simply because I suffered with anxiety myself 12 years ago. I was in a really bad place. I was having pretty much daily panic attacks, and I was really struggling to cope with life. I was functioning, but it wasn't great. So I'd wake up in the morning and the first thing that I'd think when I opened my eyes would be, what's today going to bring? And it would set off a panic attack. I had counselling for about 18 months, which helped me to a point, but I still felt that I wasn't getting any better. So somebody suggested hypnotherapy to me at that time, and I thought, really? Is hypnotherapy useful for anxiety? I thought it was just to help people stop smoking, to help with phobias. It absolutely changed my life. So I am so passionate now about helping people in the same way that I was helped, because I know how effective it can be. I know how your life can be completely turned around. I haven't had a panic attack for 12 years, and I know I will never have one again, because now I know how to cope. I know the coping strategies. I know that I have all of those thoughts, feelings and emotions under control, and I'm hoping that by sharing the knowledge that I have with you today, that you can see how effective this can be for you, and how anxiety is something that we can overcome, and it's not something that we have to live with at all. So the modern sort of medical approach to anxiety is CBT, and also medication. So CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy. So if you go along to your GP and talk to them about mental health issues, talk to them about anxiety, the talking therapy that is offered is CBT. So CBT has its place, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it, but the success rate with CBT is just around 29, just shy of 50%. So it's only just above placebo. So in clinical trials, CBT is only just a little bit more effective than placebo. And a lot of people that have been prescribed medication tend to find that they're back on medication after 18 months. So the success rate of medication is between 1 to 15%, and that was through a clinical trial done by NICE. So I'm very passionate about helping people to find a way of overcoming anxiety, not living with the label. When you are diagnosed with anxiety, it's almost like you're given a label and you live up to the expectations of what that label is. So it's really important for me, and I'm so passionate about helping people overcome this. Now, with hypnotherapy, generally I see clients for around 4 or 6 sessions, and after that they generally tend to leave me because they're much better. So it's a very quick process, and I I believe in it so much because it's helped me, and I work with it on a daily basis. And I lose lots of clients, but for the right reasons. So they leave me, but they leave me because they're better. So they're not here for 18 months. They're not here coming in to see me every week talking about their problems, because that's not what it's about. It's about finding the solutions. It's about helping them to see things from a different perspective. So that's why I've decided to do what I'm doing, because I feel that if I can get the message out, even to just one person, to just help them, then, you know, it will make such a difference. So what is anxiety? Often people think of it as an illness or a disorder, or is it just an emotion? So anxiety is a normal survival mechanism that's inbuilt into all human beings. So when it's completely out of proportion, that's when it becomes an issue. So stress can be good for us. Stress can work for us in a really good way. So for example, I was doing some public speaking. I was delivering a mental health in the workplace workshop a few weeks ago. And I felt that stress, that, you know, and it was good because it helped me. You know, it's very important to me that I got it right. So I found that that stress helps me. So it can help us in situations, you know, when we've got a deadline. Stress is good for us then, because it means that we can work with that stress to motivate us to get to the finish line. And stress is often only present as long as that trigger is present, whereas anxiety is an internal response. Now that's often brought on by stress, and it can last long after the stress is gone. So when stress gets out of hand, that's when it becomes the anxious response. And anxiety can affect people in so many different ways. So often people will come to see me with various issues going on. They don't know that it's anxiety related. So it could be a phobia, it could be panic attacks, it could be obsessive compulsive disorder, excessive worrying, it could be social anxiety. And often those undercurrents of anxiety lead to other issues in our lives, such as depression, addictive behaviours around alcohol, gambling, shopping, spending, eating, drinking, because what happens is it provides a temporary relief to those anxious thoughts. So anxiety at its most basic level is an emotion. It's not actually an illness. So that's good news. It's not an illness. So how common are anxiety problems? So there's some stats here about anxiety and sort of how common they are. Now, anxiety is highly treatable. Yeah, as you can see from the statistic here on the left, only 36.9% of people receive treatment for anxiety. A lot of people are just there coping and living with it. And 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem at some point in their lives. Particularly since COVID, government research has shown that depression and anxiety symptoms increased quite significantly, simply because there was a lot of worry about the pandemic, about the effects on our health. We were also put in a situation where we were taken away from seeing people, spending time with people, that human interaction that we all need. And it was the uncertainty of it all as well. So that really did affect people's mental health. But referrals to mental health services dropped during the first lockdown, obviously because of the pandemic. The appointments weren't as readily available. People weren't able to get face-to-face help because a lot of appointments, and they still are online. So we know that there's a big problem there, and it's still ongoing. You know, I receive inquiries about anxiety on a daily basis, and people often resort to private treatment because they're on a waiting list for 18 months. And anxiety isn't something that waits. It's going to continue affecting you. So yeah, a lot of people are seeking sort of that help in order to help them overcome it. Just bear with me 1 second. There we go. So often people say, I have anxiety. And anxiety, it isn't something we have, it's not something we own. And changing that language can be really helpful. So anxiety is actually something we do, it's not something we have. So the beauty of that is it means that we can decide not to do it anymore. Now, I'm making that sound really simple. It's not quite as simple as that, but it means there's hope. It means that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So it's not something I have anxiety, therefore it's with me for the rest of my life. So once we start to think about anxiety differently, once we begin to look at things differently, and then we can look at how we can change it. Now, often when people are diagnosed with anxiety, it leads to those expectations and those beliefs about who you are, what this means, and creates those limiting beliefs in your mind that really aren't helpful. So I often talk to my clients about ditching those labels, often labels that we place upon ourselves or labels that are placed upon us by others, you know, and it is that whole I have anxiety, and it's something that you carry with you. Because our brains can change, so we're not hardwired to be a certain way. So Hebb's law states that neurons that fire together wire together. So what I mean by that is we have the ability to rewire our brains. So if you think about, if you drive, the very first time you got in a car and started to drive, it was a very conscious process. You had to think about indicating, you had to think about changing gear, using the clutch, checking the mirrors, all of those things. And it's a very, very conscious process when you first learn to drive. And then after a few years of driving, you just get in the car and it's like autopilot. So it happens without you even having to think about it. Now, our brains love automation, and it's called neuroplasticity. So what happens is, the very first time you got into the car and started to drive, those neurons fired together for the very first time. Now, if you never got into a car again and never drove again, that pathway would just diminish, it would never fire again. But every time you got into that car, that pathway got stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point where you have a nice, deeply entrenched pathway in the brain that says, when I get into the car, subconscious takes over because it's an automated process. I know exactly what I'm doing. I don't need to consciously think about it anymore. And we just follow those behavioural patterns. That's why when you drive somewhere and you get there and you think, I don't remember that journey, how did I get here? That's exactly what's happened. The conscious part of your brain was thinking elsewhere. It didn't have to concentrate on the driving anymore. Subconsciously, it took over. Now, this can be the same with anxiety, stress, depression, because we literally change our brain all of the time. And when we change our brain, we can change our mind. So what's really important is to understand how our mind and body are intrinsically linked, and they provide constant communication between each other. Now, anxiety does affect our whole body. Even though it starts in the brain, it does affect us, it affects our whole body. So often I see people that come to see me with irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome is a symptom of the anxiety. So often it's a physical symptom that's brought about by worrying about the symptoms, and when we worry about the symptoms, that makes the symptoms worse, and that makes us stress even more. So it's a vicious cycle. So that's why hypnosis is really, really effective for irritable bowel syndrome, and I work with it very regularly. But it can affect us in a number of different ways. So emotionally, cognitively, it's that persistent worry, it's that general fear, that feeling of impending doom, unable to make decisions, that fog in your mind, and negative thoughts. You seem to be overwhelmed with thinking negatively forecasting the future, thinking about things that have never even happened, thinking what if all of the time. And that's a good sign that anxiety is taking control. From a physical perspective, breathing, palpitations. I've talked about IBS, digestive issues, you know, they can really take hold with anxiety. Sweating, muscle tension, dizziness, fatigue, all of these things that we feel as a result of feeling anxious. And then from a behavioural point of view, avoidance is a big thing that I notice. So often when we perceive that something is a threat, we will avoid it, like you said, because we perceive it as a threat, so we want to stay away from it. But what that does is it reinforces that thought process. We can often be restless as well. You can't just sit and settle down. You can't just sit and relax. You can't just sit with a calm mind. You're restless. You can't allow yourself to just relax. And insomnia is a big part of it as well. So sleep is a huge part. One of the things that I do with every single client that I have is I provide them with a free hypnosis recording, which helps with the sleep. It helps to regulate those sleep patterns, because when we get enough sleep, when we get the right levels of rapid eye movement sleep, when we process everything that's going on in our minds from a stress perspective, it just helps everything calm down a lot. So looking at the brain, there's two bits of the brain that I tend to talk about quite regularly. Obviously our brain is a very vast and complex, amazing machine, but I'm concerned with these two bits. So we have the conscious mind and we have the unconscious mind. So I always talk about the iceberg effect. So if you look at the image there, it's very much like an iceberg. The conscious mind is the bit that sticks up out of the water, and then the unconscious mind is the part that's completely submerged. Now the conscious mind is very logical, it's very linear, but it's limited in its capacity. So when the conscious mind is in control, life's good. We can look at a situation from a rational perspective. We can rationalise all sorts of situations without any emotion. We can make good decisions. We can plan. That part of the brain is concerned with happiness. But then we've got the unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious mind is not remotely logical or rational. It's a pattern-making machine with the sole purpose of survival. So it doesn't care about happiness, it's all about survival. And information passes through our unconscious mind through associations and repetition. And the two minds work together, and we acquire knowledge consciously, and then this information is passed to the unconscious where it becomes automatic, a bit like what I just explained about the driving. So consciously we started to learn to drive, and then it passed the automation to the unconscious part of the mind. So it's a very vast resource, and when we know how to work with it in the right way, we can really change things. So what causes anxiety? We have a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is our fight, flight, freeze response. It's always on red alert. So right now, as we're sitting here, mine's doing it, yours is doing it. It's constantly in this fight, flight, freeze, fight, flight, freeze, fight, flight, freeze. Now, if we were to hear a really loud bang, we would all jump and the amygdala would spike. So what's happening there is, rightly so, your amygdala is recognising that there's a threat. There could be something that's a threat to our lives. So you hear the loud bang, you respond to it. A few milliseconds later, the conscious part of the brain will kick in and it will say, okay, it's just a door blowing shut in the wind, you're perfectly safe, you're perfectly fine, and everything will start to calm down again. Your heart rate will start to decrease again. You take a breath and you feel that relief that everything was okay. Now, that part of the brain is very, very powerful and very, very influential. Far more powerful than the conscious part of the brain. And that part of the brain is triggered when we perceive a danger or threat. So it will increase your heart rate and your blood pressure. Your pupils will dilate to take in as much information as possible. Your veins will contract to send blood to your muscles, taking blood away from the stomach, taking blood away from the brain. Now, this system was designed for very short bursts. So when we were cavemen, for example, if you were to see a saber-toothed tiger, you would want to be reacting in that way to get away from that tiger as quickly as possible. The problem is this system is not designed to be continuously activated. And the problem is in today's society, we are constantly under stress from our personal lives. So we're constantly feeling the effects of that stress. So evolution has provided us with lots of survival mechanisms, and they can be categorised into protection and growth. So even as fully grown adults, we are always growing. You cannot be in a state of protection and growth at the same time. So protection will always triumph over growth. So this is why almost every major illness is linked to chronic stress. So when we can sort the stress out, it can really help with everything else. And there's some stats here on the screen. Some of these were really quite astonishing. Your skin rebuilds itself in a month. Now, I work with a lot of skin conditions, eczema, psoriasis. a lot of allergies, and they're exacerbated by stress. So once we can get the stress under control, the skin conditions generally tend to subside and improve quite considerably. Your DNA renews itself every 2 months. Your brain rebuilds itself in a year. So all of these things, when we have a healthy mind, our body can continue to rebuild themselves in these ways. However, when we're in this state of protection, that growth stops. So this is why, as I said before, almost every major illness is linked to chronic stress. So we're not born with anxiety. Our fears are a result of conditioning. We're only born with two fears that we're born with. The fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. So they're the only fears that we're actually born with. Everything else is learnt behaviour. So they're born through experience or observation. So at around the age of 8, our critical faculty is formed. Now the critical faculty is a bit like a security guard, protecting you from the information that's passed to your unconscious mind. So most beliefs are created in childhood. Most phobias are created in childhood. I see a lot of people with arachnophobia, phobia of spiders, especially around this time of year when they start to come into the house. And often the phobia occurred when they were a young child, and it's something that they've had all their life. I suffered with arachnophobia myself before I became a hypnotherapist, and it started for me when I was 4 years of age, seeing my mum running away, screaming at a house spider. So my critical faculty was completely wide open at that point. So my unconscious mind took that image of my mum running away and screaming at a spider, put it into my filing system in my unconscious mind and said, this is something you need to be aware of. The person that looks after you and gives care to you is scared of this, so therefore you need to be scared of it too. And that phobia stayed with me throughout my whole life until it was dealt with through hypnotherapy. And my logical brain knew a spider couldn't harm me. It knew it was completely safe. It knew it wouldn't kill me in any way, shape or form. But my unconscious mind had this response to spiders that knew that this is something you need to be scared of, and it just kept repeating the behaviour over and over again. So our brain loves what is familiar, and it's part of our natural brain function to generalise and categorise information. And that allows us to be able to interpret the world around us. So every time we enter a situation, our brain will do a search to see if we have a map of how to respond to that situation. It's a little bit like doing a Google search. So you do a Google search and Google will bring up closest results to whatever you have searched, the things that are similar to. And the more we use these maps, the more hardwired they become. So your brain always wants to take the easiest route possible in order to be efficient. So it will always choose a previous behaviour or habit in response to a trigger or cue, rather than consider creating a new one. So, for example, I see lots of people that have problems with eating sugar, and it's almost like it's out of control. So what happens is, as children, we're often, if we fall over and hurt ourselves, if we've been well behaved, we're given sweets as a reward. So from a very early age, that conditioning is there. Oh, when you're good, you get sugar. If you hurt yourself, you get sugar. So we start seeking sugar as rewards, we start seeking it for comfort. What happens is then, the unconscious part of the brain will continue to search for, okay, last time I felt bad, this made me feel better. So that's where those cravings for sugar or whatever it is, whether it's alcohol, whether it's a cigarette, whether it's gambling, whether it's drugs, whether it's spending money, that those behaviours will continue because this part of the brain is not innovative at all. It won't seek new options. It will just refer to previous patterns of behaviour. So it will just continue to do what it's always done rather than create a new one. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. So often people will come and see me and just say, I want to stop this behaviour, but I can't. Every time I try, I end up going back to it. So often we need to speak to the unconscious part of the mind to bring about that change. And we condition ourselves to believe all sorts of things that aren't necessarily true. And many of these things can have a real impact on our health and happiness. Actually, what we see, it's like a unique personal virtual reality, and it's constructed by our brain. Sight is an illusion, and to create this illusion, your brain has to consult your memories and your conceptual understanding of the world, your knowledge, your opinions, your beliefs and your emotions, all of this and more. And it's a really complex system which allows us to see, and most of this happens at an unconscious level without us even noticing it. And what we do see is a construction of our own making, and sometimes that's experienced passively and just accepted as a reality. We don't question it. Our mind is incredibly brilliant, but our brain doesn't know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. So to demonstrate that fact, what I'd like you to do now is close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, just place one hand out in front of you. And I'd like you to imagine that you're holding a lemon in your hand. A yellow, ripe, juicy lemon. And just imagine how that waxy skin feels in your hand. Just imagine the feel of that lemon in your hand. Now bring that lemon up to your nose. And imagine smelling the lemon, taking in that citrusy aroma. And then just imagine that you're biting into that waxy skin of that lemon now. Noticing that citrusy, acidic taste in your mouth. And that juice of the lemon in your mouth, experiencing that sour taste of the lemon. Then open your eyes. Now, often when I do this exercise, I can see the people in front of me and their faces go, because it's that sour taste and they're experiencing that imagined response as though it's real. So in this sense, anxiety is not real. It's a product of our imagination, and it causes us to worry about things that don't exist or may never exist. That's where the what ifs come in, where you're thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you spend lots of time in your own mind creating these scenarios. So anxiety is a response caused by how we think. And your beliefs about the world, they're just like the filter on a camera. Life is an illusion created by your perception. So we all have a different map of the world. We all see things differently. And it can be changed in the moment you choose to change it. We'll filter our experiences based on our beliefs and values. So it's not what happens, it's not the event, but the meaning you attach to it. And that's all about the emotions that you experience at the time. Now, when we are anxious, the part of the brain that's required for cognitive thought, the left prefrontal cortex, goes offline. And our thinking becomes very black and white, all or nothing, and we rely on those unconscious maps. And our brains, according to neuroscience, are wired to reflect everything that you know in your life. So, to demonstrate that, we're going to do another exercise now. So, this is an exercise based on the reticular activating system. So quickly have a look around the room that you're in. And while you're looking around, I want you to notice everything in the room that's brown, whether it's a chair, whether it's the floor, whether it's the walls, whether it's a picture. Just notice everything in the room that's brown. And now close your eyes. And keeping your eyes closed, I want you to try and recall as many things as you can in the room that are brown. And then keeping your eyes closed, I want you to try and think of everything in the room that's red. And you should notice that you can see more brown than red. And as you open your eyes now, look around the room and notice how many things that you see that are red. So our brain will focus on what we choose to focus on. So when we choose to focus on all of the brown objects in the room, that's all we can think about. It's very difficult then to see the red things in the room. So numerous studies that support the power of thought have been done, and we only need to examine the placebo effect. the placebo effect creates a positive effect because you believe it will. So if somebody tells you this tablet is going to make you feel better, this tablet is going to do this, the placebo effect, there's been so much research into it. Because that belief is there, the power of the thought makes it happen. And thoughts are things, they're real, and they create a chemical response. Just because you can't see them, it doesn't mean that they're not there. So if you drop an apple on the floor, you know that gravity caused it to fall. You can't see gravity, but you don't question it. You see the effect of it, just like your thoughts. You can't see them, but you can feel the effects of them. So thoughts, choices, behaviours equal our experiences and emotions. So long as you keep thinking the same way, what do you think that creates more of? The same. In effect, you remind yourself who you think you are. So it's holding on to that perception of I'm an anxious person. So thinking about how long you think you can feel emotion for, how long you can get anxious for, well, that's actually objective. So the life of a thought is however long you want to think it. Emotional drives like anxiety have a very limited lifespan, and they only last around 90 seconds. So in order for that feeling to continue, we have to keep sparking it off. And we either do that with the images that we create in our minds or the words that we are saying to ourselves. And often I find with my clients, it's that internal dialogue, really paying attention to those self-sabotaging stories. What are you saying to yourself about yourself? I often say to my clients, if you had a pet parrot in your house that was saying all the things to you that you said to yourself, you'd either put a blanket over that parrot's cage or you'd let it fly away, because we allow ourselves to speak to ourselves in the way that we do. So it's really important to become aware of that internal dialogue and all of those things that you say to yourself about yourself. So you have the power to start anxiety with a thought. So the good news is you also have the power to stop it. So if you change your thoughts, you change your perspective. Change your thoughts, you change your life. And I see this on a daily basis in my clinic here. And obviously I've experienced it myself as well. Just changing what happens up here can really make a complete difference to our lives. So I'm going to share some really useful anxiety management techniques with you now. So the first one, if you can, in the room that you're in, if you can stand up and raise your right arm out in front of you. Okay, and then I want you to rotate your arm clockwise behind you until you feel uncomfortable. When it feels uncomfortable, stop. And just remember how far your arm went that time. Just make a mental note of how far you went. And then just return to your normal position. Close your eyes. And I want you to imagine now that you're raising your arm, rotating your arm, but this time you're going to go 50% further than you just did. So just keep taking your arm around. You're going to go 50% further than you just did. Now open your eyes. Just notice how much further your arm went that time. You can probably notice how much further my arm's gone this time as well. So your ability hasn't changed. All that's changed was that you imagined doing it. You imagined being successful. And therefore you created a neurological pathway of that possibility. So going back to the lemon demo again, when you're thinking about the lemon, you're imagining the lemon. You notice all of the responses as though it was really there. Because that part of your mind doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. So thinking about a situation now, and I would do this a lot with my clients, thinking about a situation that would make you anxious, and imagine it going the way you want it to, and feeling the way you would like to feel in that situation. So for example, I recently did quite a big talk in front of a couple of hundred people about stress and resilience, and my amygdala was going off. I'm human, so I was feeling all of the, this is going to be a bit nerve-wracking, and I was feeling all, the sweaty palms and my heart racing, but in a good way. I had it, I felt great. But what I was doing to help myself in that situation was visualising that talk going as well as it possibly could, everybody hanging on my every word, everybody really benefiting from everything that I had to say. And that really, really helped me through that situation by just visualising my success. Champion athletes do it all the time. Champion golfers do it all the time. They visualise succeeding, and it's so important. That can really help. So the second technique that I'm going to work on is the finger squeeze. So think of something that makes you anxious and just think about it and give it a number between 1 and 10. 10 being the worst you can imagine it, 1 being perfectly fine. And then I want you to take your dominant hand and I want you to squeeze the middle finger of your opposite hand. And now check in with that anxiety and see what you notice. Now, you'll notice that it's reduced. You're not thinking the same way about it as you were before. It's much less than a 10. You'll notice that coming down the more you do this. And this works because this middle finger is connected to the meridian line that connects the kidney, and it produces stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. And when we squeeze that finger, it sends that message to the kidney not to produce the hormones. So you can physiologically not get anxious when you squeeze that finger. So that's something you can use on a daily basis, and it's really, really helpful. Okay, we're going to try the bilateral stimulation. So for this one, if you can just, if you've got a pen or just a small object that you can get to hand right now, I'll give you a few seconds to just grab something, but a pen's ideal for this. Okay, so what I want you to do, hold the item out in front of you with your left hand. Okay, and then I want you to take your arm out to the side, still holding the pen. Bring your other arm out in front of you, your right arm. Bring it into the middle. Hold it with your right hand and take your right hand down. Bring it back to the middle, pass it to the other hand. That's it. We're going to do this quite a few times. Train you through them. And just keep passing it in the middle. Okay, so normally around 20 times is sufficient. You don't need to use a pen, you can use a key, you can use an ornament, whatever's comfortable to sort of hold up in the air. Okay, so this technique works because when we have an emotional drive, it's generated from a very small part of our brain. And when we use this technique, what we're doing is we're stimulating the blood flow and the neurological impulses across both hemispheres of the brain. Balancing the activity in this way means that that small part of the brain that was creating the anxiety can no longer hold itself together because we've taken that focus away. So again, that's something that you can use when you're feeling anxious. Just grab an object, do it about 20 times. Perfect. So, here are some more self-help tools for you. Breathing. So I often use box breathing, if you've heard of box breathing, and I'm going to demonstrate it now. What this does is it slows the body down and it counteracts the anxiety response to slow down the thoughts. So you can do this with your eyes closed, and I'm going to talk you through it. So I'm going to exhale on the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale on the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, we start again. Exhale on the count of 4. Hold for 4. Inhale on the count of 4. Hold for the count of 4. And it's just remembering the reason it's called box breathing is you just imagine those 4 seconds. So exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, and you just count 4 seconds in between each one. Mental rehearsal. So we all know that when anxiety is triggered, it disrupts our cognitive thinking process and our subconscious map kicks in and takes over. So by mentally rehearsing how you want to respond to those situations, you retrain the brain's response. So if you're feeling nervous about a specific conversation with somebody that makes you feel nervous, you can start to rehearse mentally how it's going to go, how you want it to go. Often we, if we've got a meeting coming up, we'll think about that meeting 50 times and we've replayed that memory, everything going wrong. The actual meeting goes okay, but you've lived that meeting 50 times in your mind. So it's switching that around and thinking, right, how do I want this to go? I'm going to mentally rehearse it in my mind. And by doing that, again, we're firing all of those neurons together to help with that neuroplasticity. And planning your responses, because your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. So that can really help as well. And it's that self-talk, just becoming aware now of that negative self-talk, what you're telling yourself. And remember, your subconscious is always listening to you. It's always there, it's always listening. So whatever you're saying to yourself that's negative, it's listening. So we can switch that around and we can start talking about what's positive. Start talking about the things, the strengths that you do have, the things that you do well, and really starting to think about those things. Because again, that self-talk can just be like autopilot. It just happens without you realising. You're constantly in this negative thought process about yourself, which then affects your self-esteem, affects your confidence, your self-belief. And you would be amazed when you take control of that internal dialogue and start to switch it around. It can make a huge difference in terms of how you feel, how you think, how you act and how you behave. So, thank you everybody for joining me today. I've just popped my contact details here, so if you do want to connect with me at all, you can do so via my website, or I've put my Instagram link on there as well. I do offer a free initial consultation, and I do that online or I do it face-to-face at my office here in Bromsgrove. So anybody that would like a chat about how potentially I can help, it's a free 1-hour consultation. So it's an opportunity for us to have a chat about what's happening with you. I explain a lot of detail how I work, how hypnotherapy works, and to just see how that can benefit you. So my contact details there if you do want to get in touch. I will be following up with an email after this. I have got some free bonuses for everybody that registered. So I do have a free Combat Anxiety ebook. And I've also got a nice relaxing hypnosis recording to send to everyone as well as a thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to stop recording now.